When you're dealing with one of the most callous dictators of the 21st century, there can only be one response: cruelty, not against the people over whom that dictator rules, but against the very fabric of the war machine that he has brought against you. Ukraine knows this all too well, and in April, Ukraine delivered unto Russia the cruelest month that Putin and his cronies have experienced. From Crimea to the Urals, Ukraine has obliterated everything in sight as Russian oil burns and the country's army collapses. Strap yourselves in. We've got a lot to talk about here. On May 4th, Kyiv Post provided the major headline, which is that Ukraine's long-range drone specialists successfully hit 14 Russian oil refineries and fuel hubs on Russian territory during April. This isn't just big news, it's a record. Never before have so many of Ukraine's drones found their marks so many times on Russian oil infrastructure in a single month, and in several cases, they hit the same target several times. Ukraine's drones are traveling deeper than ever, too. In one of the instances we're about to cover, Ukraine sent a drone over 1,500 kilometers, or a little over 930 miles, just to shove it straight into yet another of Russia's vital refineries. And that's not all. April was the cruelest month yet for Russia for so many other reasons, as Ukraine has escalated its deep strike campaign to an insane level. But let's start with Russia's oil. This is the refinery roll call. Ukraine's Ministry of Defense provides all the details. We take you first to the Bashneft-Novoil refinery, which is in the settlement of Ufa in Russia's Bashkortostan region, 1,400 kilometers, or around 870 miles away from Ukraine. That refinery produces lubricants and high-quality oils, and it has a processing capacity of 7 million tons of oil per year. Ukraine hit it hard and left it burning, and there was so much more to come. In Kstovo, which is in Russia's Nizhny Novgorod region, the Gorky oil pumping station was a target. Ukraine's drones didn't have as far to travel this time around, just 800 kilometers, or about 497 miles, but they did their jobs, taking out a pair of primary oil refining units at a refinery that handles about 17 million tons of oil per year and is responsible for providing a massive 30% of Russia's entire gasoline consumption. Next up, Tuapse. Poor Tuapse. We mentioned earlier that Ukraine hit some refineries several times. In Tuapse, refinery workers must have wondered if Ukraine's drones had a grudge. They struck on April 16th, April 20th, and April 28th, taking out processing units, destroying at least 24 fuel storage tanks, and utterly crippling a plant that handles 4.4% of Russia's refining, including the production of Euro 5 standard petroleum products that are used by Russia's army. Oh, and just in case Tuapse thought that Ukraine had forgotten about it, Ukraine hit the refinery once again on May 1st. Air defenses? Never heard of them, Putin must be saying. In addition to slapping around the Tuapse refinery, as though it owes Ukraine money, Ukraine struck plenty more refineries all throughout Russia. The Syzran refinery in Samara was hit hard enough to cause a massive fire by drones that had to travel 900 kilometers, or almost 560 miles. Also in the Samara region, Ukraine's drones caused explosions and a massive fire at the Novokuybishevsk refinery, which handles about 8.8 million tons of oil per year and produces 20 types of petroleum products, many of which are used by Russia's military. In Perm and Orsk, both of which are around 1,500 kilometers away from Ukraine, refineries were struck. The first saw its Lukoil Permnefteorg Syntez refinery get hit by the Alpha unit of Ukraine's SBU. That plant deals with 13 million tons of Russian oil per year, and Ukraine's drones took one of its primary oil processing units offline. In Orsk, which is in the Orenburg region of Russia, Ukraine's drones caused a fire to break out at a refinery that produces around 30 types of products and has a capacity of 6.6 million tons of oil per year. We feel like we're missing one. Ah yes, the Yaroslavsky refinery in Yaroslav didn't escape Ukraine's notice. Drones traveled about 750 kilometers, or about 466 miles, to tear through a vacuum distillation unit at the refinery, which has a capacity of 15 million tons of oil and is a key cog in the Russian war machine because it produces gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. It was all enough to make Putin's head spin. Frankly, we're almost in a daze, and we're only just getting started. So far, we've only covered the refineries that Ukraine hit in a month, where it shoved the long-range knife deep into Putin's ribs. Next up came the twisting of that knife so hard that Putin must think that it's pirouetting in his lung. Ports, ships, hardware, production facilities, and so much more came under fire from Ukraine in the cruelest month ever for Russia. Sticking with the oil theme, let's hit Russia's ports. After all, Ukraine did it plenty of times in April. In Primorsk, which is one of Russia's key oil export hubs in the Leningrad region, Ukraine's drones damaged a trio of RVSP 2000 tanks and caused a massive fire. Those tanks have a total volume of 60,000 cubic meters of oil, and they are only the latest that Russia has lost in a port located 850 kilometers, or 528 miles, away from Ukraine. Drone units got a jump on the Primorsk strikes, having hit the export hub several times already in March. And if Russia thought that things might slow down in May, it can think again. Primorsk was hit with yet more drones on May 3rd, sparking yet another massive fire. Ust Luga, which is Russia's other major Baltic Sea port, didn't fare much better. Ukraine's drones traveled a similar sort of distance to take on that port, damaging 3 oil tanks in the process. Like Primorsk, Ust Luga was hit several times in March. By this point, it's like Ukraine is just trying to add insult to an injury that is already so severe that it has taken a pair of ports that account for around 40% of Russia's total oil exports out of commission. In addition to revisiting some of its most scarred victims from March, Ukraine decided it should take out a few more Russian oil ports while it was at it. Also in Leningrad, Ukraine hit the RPK Vysotsk Lukoil 2 oil loading terminal, causing yet another fire. In Novorossiysk, which is now one of Russia's most important Black Sea region ports, Ukraine's drones flew 420 kilometers, or about 260 miles, to land hits on the Sheskari's oil terminal. Yet another fire erupted, cutting off Russia's ability to ship the oil that it can get out of Primorsk and Ust-Luga to its customers via the Black Sea. And finally, in the Krasnodar Krai, Ukraine caused another fire with a drone strike at the Tikhoretsk oil pumping station. Take a handful of strikes against oil depots in Crimea and the Krasnodar region, and you get the single most brutal monthly campaign that Ukraine has launched against Russian oil since the war began. And Russia is feeling the pain. Even as it looked set to profit from the sky-high oil prices caused by the blockade in the Strait of Hormuz, Russia has ended up cutting its exports massively. Russia was supposed to be raking in an extra $150 million per day from its oil sales, as the Financial Times reported on March 12th. Instead, April saw Russia being forced to limit its exports because the ports it uses to supply its shadow ships were burning, and the refineries that make the products that go to those ports collapsed. According to RBC Ukraine, Russia's oil exports dropped by 16.8%, amounting to a 1.8 million ton shortfall in April when compared to March. That was precisely the point for Ukraine. Hit Russia hardest where its oil is made and where it leaves the country, and you make sure that Putin has as little money as possible to fuel his war machine. Okay, let's take a breather for just a moment. We've covered a lot of April strikes already, and there are plenty more to go. But before we start reeling off more casualties of the most devastating month of Ukrainian strikes that we've ever seen, this is a quick reminder that you're watching the military show. There's a lot more where this comes from, so make sure you hit the subscribe button if you're getting new insight from our channel. Right, back to the strikes. Ukraine wasn't done with Russia's oil by a long shot in April. In addition to the refinery and port strikes, Ukraine also hit tankers and, in a very rare attack, even took out the means of Russian oil production at its very source. On April 10th, the Kyiv Independent reported that Ukraine's military had struck a pair of oil drilling platforms in the Caspian Sea, located around 1,000 kilometers, or 620 miles, away from the front lines. The platforms were both ice-resistant facilities stationed at the Yuri Korchagin and V. Grafer oil fields. This attack represents yet another evolution in Ukraine's strategy of shattering Russian oil. It's taking out the export hubs and the refineries that turn Russian crude oil into refined oil products that can be sold for money. That's two links of a chain down. With its Caspian Sea strikes, Ukraine has revealed that it's going to focus on another link. Russia's crude oil is being burned before it ever hits the refineries. Bit by bit, Ukraine is crippling Russia's entire oil supply chain. At the other end of that chain are the tankers that move Russian oil out of the export hubs and to the buyers. Seeing as it was already inflicting so much damage, Ukraine must have figured that it might as well take out a tanker too. After all, that tanker was in Tuapse, and Ukraine proved nothing in April, if not the fact that Tuapse's air defenses are so weak that Ukraine can land blows on the region as though it were Mike Tyson boxing a punch-drunk toddler. On April 29th, it was revealed that Ukraine's drones had scored a direct hit on the Marquise tanker, which was located about 210 kilometers or 130 miles southeast of Tuapse at the time, and was sailing without generating a signal from an automatic identification system. That's a typical tactic used by Russian shadow fleet ships, as is sailing under the flag of a nation other than Russia. In this case, the now stricken Russian tanker was sailing under Cameroon's flag. But Ukraine wasn't fooled. The vessel was known to be part of the Shadow Fleet, and it is sanctioned by the UK, the European Union, Canada, New Zealand, and Switzerland. Ukraine must have decided that all of these sanctions weren't doing enough to stop the ship from sailing. So it unleashed its more kinetic sanctions to take it out of commission. Finally, we must be done, right? Oh no. That knife, we said, was being twisted between Putin's ribs, ended up getting shoved so deep that it came out of his rear as Ukraine accompanied all of these attacks against Russia's oil industry with strikes against aircraft, warships, and even the very heart of the Russian military-industrial complex. And one of these strikes was as humiliating as anything that Russia has experienced up to this point in the Ukraine war. In an April 25th operation, Ukraine struck the Shagol airfield in the far-flung region of Chelyabinsk. The targets, up to 4 fighter jets, including a pair of Su-57 stealth fighters that are supposed to be Russia's answer to U.S. jets like the F-22 and F-35. The Su-57 is the best that Russia has to offer. Now 2 of them are burning on the ground at an airbase that is 1,700 kilometers, or 1,056 miles, away from Ukraine, and right back into Russia we go. In the border region of Bryansk, Ukraine's drones came raining down on the Strela plant on April 1st. That plant is responsible for building components that Russia places into its cruise missiles, and, according to Ukraine's Ministry of Defense, it has fulfilled 120 government contracts to service the needs of Russia's defense industry. This strike is a classic case of Ukraine carefully selecting a target that will do the maximum damage possible to Putin's strategy of launching long-range missiles at Ukraine. In April alone, Russia rattled off 141 missiles of various types in Ukraine's direction, along with 6,663 drones. Russia broke its record for monthly aerial strikes in April. Ukraine taking out the likes of the Strela plant means that Russia struggles to replenish its missile stockpiles. Heading to Taganrog in the Rostov region, Ukraine hit the Atlant Aero plant on April 19th. This time, it was the Ukrainian Navy grabbing the glory, as it unleashed Neptune missiles at a plant that is responsible for the entire production cycle of the Molnia strike and reconnaissance drones that Russia's forces use on the front lines. Atlant Aero also makes components used in the Orion drone, along with components used in Kh-50 missiles and Kab-20 guided aerial bombs. Russia reported a fire in the warehouse area of the sprawling plant, and it wasn't even able to trot out its normal drone debris excuse due to the use of the Neptune missile being undeniable. We promise that we are almost there with our coverage of the cruel and very necessary punishment that Ukraine delivered to Russia in April. Our final stop is with the Black Sea Fleet. Ukraine attacked that fleet with a vengeance in April, taking out yet more warships and vessels that are part of a fleet that has already been forced to retreat as far away from Ukraine as possible. The retreat hasn't worked. In April, Ukraine took out the Project 775 Yamal and the Project 1171 Nikolai Filchenkov, both of which are landing ships with a combined value of $150 million. Ukraine double-tapped both vessels, hitting them on April 20th and then again on April 26th. Also on April 26th, Ukraine took out the Ivan Kurs, which is a radio reconnaissance center, and it landed a strike against a Black Sea Fleet training center. The Project 11356R Burevestnik frigate was also a victim of Ukraine's devastating long-range assaults. Hitting that warship allowed Ukraine to land another blow against Putin's missile-centric strategy, as the Burevestnik can be loaded with caliber cruise missiles that Russia regularly launches at Ukraine. In the Kerch Strait, Ukraine took out a pair of patrol boats guarding the Kerch Bridge, which is the major lifeline that connects occupied Crimea to the Russian mainland. That strike may have opened up future attacks on the bridge as part of Ukraine's strategy to liberate Crimea. And last of all, April 22 saw Ukraine damage the conning tower of an FSB border patrol ship in the Sevastopol region of Crimea. Phew. We told you at the start that we would be going from the Urals to Crimea, and Ukraine didn't disappoint. Ukraine has never pulled off long-range destruction to the level that we have seen in April. We have seen refineries and oil export hubs burned to the ground, which has had a massive effect on Russia's oil exports. Hundreds of millions of dollars of military equipment have gone up in flames, much of which Russia won't be able to replace. The ships that Ukraine hit, in particular, are going to be out of commission for a long time as Russia's shipbuilding industry falls apart due to sanctions. We've seen missile plants get destroyed, shadow fleet tankers targeted, and even the expansion of Ukraine's oil-focused strategy to a new part of the supply chain, as the Caspian Sea has become a target. Ukraine's long-range drones are flying further than ever before, and the fact that they're having so much success tells us that Russia's air defenses are more stretched than a pair of hot pants worn by a hippo. Now, it would be logical to think that Ukraine investing so much of its energy into its long-range strikes would mean that it slows down elsewhere. Maybe the Russian mid-range had a bit of a breather in April, or fewer of Putin's patsies got destroyed by Ukraine's FPV drones on the front. Not a chance. If anything, Ukraine has escalated in both of those departments too. On the mid-range front, Ukraine's defense minister, Mikhailo Fedorov, says that Ukraine doubled the number of strikes that it pulled off in the 20-kilometer to 150-kilometer or 12.4-mile to 93.2-mile range. April's number of strikes in this range was twice that seen in March and quadruple what Ukraine launched into the Russian near rear in February. What Ukraine does with these types of attacks is to shatter the support systems that help Russia to maintain its assaults on the front. Control centers are taken out. Logistical and supply lines get destroyed, as do troop gatherings and storage facilities. Every successful attack in the mid-range degrades Russia's strength on the front, and when Ukraine targets air defenses in its occupied regions, it also opens up aerial corridors that it can use to pull off more aerial assaults either in the near rear or deeper into Russia. And speaking of Russia's frontline soldiers, they had a very bad month. According to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, Russia suffered a massive 35,000 casualties in April, even as Ukraine doubled its mid-range strike volume and hit Russia itself harder than ever before. This is roughly the same number of Russians killed or wounded in March, and it means that Ukraine's approach is working. The harder it hits Russia in the rear, the weaker Putin's soldiers become. It doesn't seem like Ukraine has quite toppled the number of casualties that it inflicted on Russia in March, which was a record-breaking 35,351, but it's close, and April saw it match its previous record of 35,000 inflicted in December. Ukraine also reports that April marks the 5th consecutive month where Russia has lost more soldiers on the battlefield than it has been able to recruit into Putin's army. Ukraine's drone strikes alone have cost Russia 156,735 soldiers between December and April, United 24 media reports. Russia has recruited 148,400 soldiers during the same period, and there will have been more Russian losses. Those just mentioned are the ones that Ukraine can verify from drone footage captured by the very weapons inflicting the casualties. Add artillery strikes and attacks that aren't recorded into the mix, and Russia's 5-month casualty rate likely easily exceeds 160,000. No matter where Putin looks, there is no relief. Ukraine isn't just escalating its long-range campaign. It is scaling up across the board, and Russia simply has no answer. It's over for Russia now. April was the cruelest and most devastating month of casualties and destruction that Ukraine has inflicted on Putin's war machine. But as he trembles in a hidden bunker somewhere far away from the Kremlin, Putin will know one inescapable fact. It's only going to get worse from here for Russia. If you want to get a more in-depth taste of what Ukraine has been doing on the medium-range strike drone front, we have you covered. Our video explores Ukraine's brutal new strategy in depth, covering what Ukraine targets and how a specific strike on April 16th could be a turning point for a war that is entering a new phase. Check out that video to find out more, and don't forget to subscribe to The Military Show to see all of our latest videos about Ukraine's achievements against Russia.